Welcome to Corelight Defenders. I'm Richard Bejtlich, strategist and author in residence at Corelight. In each episode, we explore insights from the front lines of NDR, network detection and response. Today I'm speaking with Stan Kiefer, Senior Manager for Data Science and AI. Welcome, Stan.
Hey, glad to be here.
We know that it's sort of a meme that whenever anyone talks in a professional capacity in front of an audience, the word AI or the letters AI come up. But that's what we're going to be talking about today because we have quite an initiative around this at Corelight, and you're kind of our point guy for that. So I appreciate you being on the podcast. And previously we had Keith Jones on here talking about how he uses AI tools more on the research and development side, but you're sort of more looking at a holistic approach for the company. And so I think the first place I'd like to start with is how should security teams think about the use of AI in NDR platforms?
It's always been really difficult inside of the SOC to elevate the SOC, tier one analyst, tier two analyst to understand network data because network data can be very complex. In detail, Corelight data, based on Zeek is probably one of, the most complex log data sets out there. But it has its good and bad sides, right? The good side is it's a direct replication of what happened on the network. The difficult side is it can be difficult to actually consume the data. And I think that's really where AI empowers the analyst, especially within the NDR side. Being able to say, hey, I have this indicator that may come from outside of NDR. Maybe it comes from an EDR or identity, and then be able to interrogate the network data without having to be an expert in the network data. And so that, up-leveling, an analyst to be able to consume that data and at the same time be able to explore areas of the data they may have never been able to explore before because of that abstraction layer that AI brings to the table. And so it's not only a force multiplier, but it's also a knowledge multiplier.
When I worked at the AppCert decades ago and I had a question, there was very little out there. There were no search engines. The books that we had there were a couple like Unix and internet security and how to build internet firewalls. So generally you had to turn to the person next to you and say, do you know what this is? Have you seen this before? And they would have to do the same thing to ask other people. And then we got search engines and we were able to ask questions. But at that point, you relied on finding someone else having a conversation that addresses the topic of interest. And it seems now with these AI tools, you can interrogate them and they are sort of synthesizing what they've seen by looking at everything. And then it's sort of up to you to decide whether their synthesis is useful or accurate. Does that sound reasonable?
Oh, I think so, right? I mean, I think that's one of the powers of AI is, well defined and deployed AI is that, it tells you an answer, but also having referenceable data that goes with that answer. So as a human, you can look at the answer maybe the AI gave you, then look at the data that it used to generate that, and you go, okay, yes, that makes sense. Or no, it just made something completely up that was not even true. Even if I don't know the data in and out, I can look at it and tell, whether it was even close. And so I think that's really, where data is that center of the AI world. AI alone is really not trustworthy at this point, and maybe never without the data to actually reference it back. And so I think from an analyst perspective, being able to deliver them both what, the abstracted version, this is what's important, why it's important, but then, hey, if you want to dig in deeper, here's the data that backs up that. And that evidence is really the key to having that complete, picture that AI provides.
If I'm trying to accomplish a task and there's a way to measure the state of things before I make a change as suggested by AI. So I'll give you a concrete example. I've been doing some performance tuning on my gaming desktop, and I can take a test, I can do a baseline, I can get some data, I can record something with like HW64, log it to a file. Then I'll ask the AI, what do you think? What changes could I make? It makes some suggestions. I implement those. Then I rerun the test, and then I put it back and I say, now what changed? Did we make any improvement here? But without that, I think it would be difficult to know, if there were no way to measure the results, it could be completely making stuff up and I'd have no idea if it made any sense, made any made any difference. So I guess with security, what have you seen anything that we could do in a similar way with security data?
One thing that I've seen that AI is good at is translating that into, much simpler to understand terms. Whether it's translating a complex detection rule, or maybe a firewall rule, or even code into something that's much easier to consume just from technical but yet plain language. It really drives two things. It drives education and capabilities. So now when I have the thing I'm trying to understand and then a natural translation, the synapses start forming. So the next time I see that, maybe I don't even need the AI translation. I go, oh, I've seen this before. That's what this means.
Yeah, explaining what a complex regular expression does. That's a great example. There's a YouTuber I watch named Eric Parker who is not listening to this podcast, but he's a malware reverse engineer, and so he'll show in his videos just what he's doing to figure out what malware does. And when he comes across something that's obfuscated, he just dumps it into some AI and says, "Can you deobfuscate this and tell me what it means?" AI for detection, AI for integration with other tools, and AI for helping analysts, so to help them investigate and to improve their workflow. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on any one of those or all of them, or just sort of talk about how we're doing that as sort of the framework for bringing this new capability into our offering.
Corelight has been doing detection using AI, machine learning models, anomaly detection, and things of that nature for many years. One thing that you would see a trend moving forward is using these AI tools to accelerate the creation of those detections, in which we have to, right? Because the attackers are using these AI tools and going from zero to exploit in minutes sometimes, and lofting these attacks at our customers. Because now I can have this really maybe complex machine learning model broken down into very simple terms, so that when a detection is fired from a certain set of data, the analyst can go, okay, I know how this model works, because I don't have to know all these data science terms and all these things. I could just need to know, hey, this thing looks for these aspects and these features, which means this might be occurring. On top of that, providing those next steps to an analyst that either they could use or another tool, AI tool, can use to do further investigation, really blends those two together. So if I've had detection, here what it might mean, here's some potential next steps for investigation, either inside the NDR realm or outside. It's facilitating the agentic ecosystem inside of the SOC.
Are we seeing that yet? Like, is that something that products are doing? It seems like it might still be kind of early days for that.
It is early days, but we're seeing some motion in that. The agentic, think of it as an agentic triangle. I think, what we're going to see kind of form near term, because the speed in which the AI world is moving is like nothing I've ever seen in the 30 years of working in technology, is probably one kind of think of as a SOC, kind of overlord, right? So this agent is going to oversee these sub agents, which then in turn might have further sub agents. And so I think what we're going to see is maybe point products being these sub agents, in which you embed the expertise of how to use the data, its applicability, how the detections work, so on and so forth. And if every point product does that, then those become the individual experts that can be steered by this one central agent. And so in the end, the user is just going to talk to the central agent, and then the central agent is going to kind of cascade that down. I mean, we're already seeing some early products come out that look that way. And there's also been a lot of research done in that tiered agent architecture and how the language models naturally do really well in that architecture, especially because you can have very narrow scoped, well-tuned agents that are an expert at one thing, and then you can just keep multiplying them. So you end up with a ton of experts all being controlled by one kind of central orchestrator.
What are your thoughts on the end state for the way the analyst works with this data? So I have this dream that one day there will no longer be dashboards, and there will no longer be pie charts, and there will no longer be whatever the vendor, and of course I'm speaking, working at a vendor, but whatever the vendor thinks that the analyst needs to see will instead be replaced by something that is essentially either completely customized for the user by the user's interactions, or it's as simple as a prompt. And you simply talk to the master agent or whatever it is, and you say, "What do you have for me right now?" or "What do you have for me today when I start my workday?" And it says, "Well, I have 10 events that you might want to look at. Would you like to look at these?" "Yes, I would." And it just starts providing you data. And maybe it starts, if you've never used it before, it'll provide some sort of default. But otherwise, over time, it's learned what you like to see, how you like to see it, how you like to interact with it, what you do next. Do you think we'll get to that point, or is that not a good way to do it? Or I don't know. I'm just really interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's some kind of hybrid approach, right? I think for sure we're seeing with the agentic coding explosion and the use in writing custom skills, custom agents, being able to connect, via MCP or A to A, allowing these individual, you know, permutations that works well for the way the individual works, right? And being able to customize the way they work. I think that's probably, since that has worked so well and the developer community has embraced that, I think you're going to see something very similar start to happen in other communities. I can see inside of a security operations center where you might actually have, a capability for somebody to make a skill, or even more, have the system watch what an analyst does and then start adapting to that. You go, hey, for the last 5 days, it seems like you've done this search every day and looked at these output. When you come in the morning, it's already done for you. It goes, hey, just so you know, this is already done. Didn't find any anomalies. What do you want to do next? And so this adaptive way of learning how somebody operates, I think is going to be key. Now, what is unknown is how that's going to be presented in like a visual format, right? And I think that's what dashboards today are great at, is those that, you absorb data visually, you can quickly assess things, I love pie charts and graphs, and you can see trends, and all that makes sense. I think probably in the future, what we're going to see is that data really being driven as, like I said, a hybrid of the way that that individual works. And so the chart that they may show is more attuned for the work and how they work and how they've worked in the past, and trying to predict what the analyst may want to do in the future.
So let me ask you one final question then. This is probably the biggest challenge I would estimate for most people with AI. How do you keep up? Do you have any tips or tricks or any patterns of life or any recommendations for how people can try to stay engaged with this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to make it your full-time job, you still would run out of hours in the day. I think some of the traditional capabilities work, RSS feeds and, a couple trusted sources that you can rely on. Everybody has their different sources, but, kind of leaning on them to try to, get the TLDRs of the things that are important. At the same time, it's looking at things that are in your sphere, right, of application, right? And so I think for me, I don't necessarily pay a ton of attention to maybe what's going on with AI and imaging or AI and self-driving cars, but more of AI and the use of data, right? And I think that's really what helps as well, is to kind of narrow the scope down and really look at it, within the realm that is important for whatever task you're trying to achieve. The speed in which things are changing is not something like I've ever seen. Again, over 30 years experience in technology. And, you've seen things, the dot-com boom and, the internet. But if you look at the speed in which that, occurred and transitioned, it was tiny. I mean, almost like molasses compared to this, right? It is so hard to wrap my head around. Like, so for example, looking at technologies like like MCP, MCP has just now had its 1 year birthday, and it's already thinking about being sunsetted for other technologies that are maybe better and other ways of orchestrating things, because limitations were found and new ways were found to replace it. And then the AI allows you to pivot quickly to the use of those new technologies. Now, I don't know what that means when we actually productize things with these technologies that get replaced that quick, because the actual development of things using the tools really hasn't sped up at the same rate in which the tools have changed, right? So it's just going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. Keeping up is hard, but AI can help you keep up as well. Making your own podcast out of documents, and the tools themselves can help, absorb the data they produce even quicker, which sounds strange.
Well, it's funny in an AI podcast, I will just say to the viewers or to the listeners, there is no AI. I don't use any to create the podcast. It's all done by me with my editing tools, and it's all done manually. So, in case you have an issue with that, let me ask just one final question, then, Stan. Is there anything you're looking forward to, or you hope to see? And I'll give you an example. I'm personally interested in there's some old code that exists in. Well, actually, it's not even old code. It's continually maintained, but it's all written in Pascal, which is something I haven't looked at in over 35 years. And I'm waiting for the point where the models can handle a project of that size, and I can just feed it this project and say, can you turn it into something more modern, like C++ or C# or whatever? But that kind of requires just a bigger token window. Is there anything that you're looking forward to that might come about with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's just that, like I talked about earlier, that the ability to have the companions, right? And something that you can make you better as a human, but not replace you. And I think that's an important fact that we have to realize as we move forward in an industry. You can't, displacing, somebody that is an entry level position that is really required of a knowledge base to be built as they move up. Having that companion and, really accelerating that growth is really what I'm the most excited about, is be able to take somebody that normally would have taken 3 to 5 years to come up to some, competent level, that I can just turn them loose. And I might be able to do it in half that time or a third of that time.
Well, Stan, I appreciate your insights, and I'm going to have you back, hopefully, if you'll agree to come back. And I can't even imagine what the world will be like if we talk again about this topic in even 6 months. So thank you for being on the Corelight Defenders podcast.
I've enjoyed the time, and thanks again.
Thank you for joining us on the Network Defenders podcast, sponsored by Corelight. We will see you on the network.
You've been listening to Corelight Defenders. To stay informed with expert intelligence on today's cybersecurity challenges, please subscribe to ensure you never miss an episode. We'll see you on the network.